in China. So my presentation is a little different from all previous presentations in that I want to focus on the discourse of the Communist Party on political reform. I don't want to call it democratization, but I do want to say that no Chinese leader, from what Arthur said, Mao back in the 1940s until Xi since 2012, no one said democracy is not good. But we need to dissect what kind of democracy they're talking about. And only by contrasting what the party says, what kind of democracy they want, we can say what kind of democracy people sit in this room want. It's easier for Wei Jinsheng to say there will be a coup, and after the coup, 90% of the Chinese are going to support democracy. But what kind of democracy? Is this the same American democracy, one person, one vote? Or this is going to be a different type of democracy? May we say democracy of Chinese characteristics, Indian kind democracy, Japanese kind, or the Tibetan, Taiwan, or Hong Kong. There are many, many other forms of democracy. Democracy is a procedure. So that's what I want to do, is just to look at sort of the boring discourse of democracy on behalf of the Communist Party. So we start, of course, with Deng Xiaoping, beginning of the second stage that Gordon mentioned in his brilliant presentation. This is known as the Baoba speech. This is actually long before the second stage, just at the very beginning when the second stage started. And basically what he said, I have the Chinese and I have the very brief English translation here. I think Deng Xiaoping strongly believed that for all other reforms to succeed, particularly the economic reform, political reform will have to start. Political reform is the anchor of the eventual success of economic reform. Of course, right now, the Chinese leaders sort of reversed what he said, basically saying, look, in the past 30 years, we're so successful in our economic growth. That is all because we started the political reform. That obviously is not the case. So that's back in 1980. And then in 1986, Deng Xiaoping started saying, we've been talking about political reform, but what exactly is that political reform? It's just like we can still ask the question, what exactly is the democracy everyone in this room really want? Indirect democracy, like in the US, or direct democracy in India. So this is basically, he's giving the marching order to Zhao Ziyang, saying, you got to come up with a plan. This is when Chen Yizi and all the brain trust got together and started thinking what exactly we're going to do. So that crystallized in the 13th Party Congress. So this is the only time, I believe, that a political reform package was presented at the Party Congress with an actionable plan. So there is a plan. This is what we're going to do. And of course, we need to know what exactly that plan is. So I call a 7-step political reform. And of course, some of these things are still being mentioned by the current leadership. But I think the first one, the separation of state and party, this is very, very important. Right now, it's still a party state. As long as China is a party state, then it's hard for anyone to talk about meaningful political reform. And then there's also the one that talks about we need to set up a social consulting mechanisms, 建立社会协商对话机制. That's very important. How are you going to reach out to the community, to the society, in terms of drawing them into the political participation process? So obviously, this was presented. We really don't know, had it not been for the 1989 event, how this plan is going to unfold. With Zhao Ziyang gone, leaving the stage, the whole thing was tabled. And I think in that political work report to the 13th Party Congress, Zhao Ziyang specifically mentioned the centrality of election in any meaningful political reform. I think either this is deliberate or as part of the attempt on anti-corruption, the recent expose of what happened in Liaoning, once again has brought people's attention to the centrality of elections. If you are not allowing people to participate, then that's what you're going to get. People are buying votes, buying their seats at the provincial People's Congress as well as the National People's Congress. So moving forward, Jiang Zemin came up with 1989 interpretation. Of course, this is in the context of Tiananmen Square incident. And here is, I think this is very important, is that yes, we want democracy, but it's going to be different from Western style democracy. This discourse, this concept has always been there until today. Is that, I think there's a slight language change, is that we want all the beneficial achievements of political civilization of the mankind, but at the same time, we reject the wholesale adoption of Western political system model. So this is, what Jiang said in 1989, and then at the 14th Party Congress. For all those years, we've been working on promoting political reform. Each and every time, a party congress was held, we're like so excited. So we're going to go through line by line, word by word, looking at exactly how they talk about political reform. So when we first look at this, we're kind of excited, People's Congress system, which is very important, which is by the Constitution of China. This is the fundamental power institution of the country. If they say we're going to try to improve and perfect People's Congress deputy system, that's good. However, each and every time when this is being put into the political report, there is no follow-up to that. And then there is the making decisions, more democratically, more scientifically, and of course, democracy also for the first time was being linked, just like most favored nation privilege is being linked to human rights in China, it's been linked to stability. So, it's kind of ironic. When they talk about political reform, they also talk about 社会治安, social stability, and harmony. 5 years later, at the 15th Party Congress, is 不照搬西方政治制度的模式. This has been uttered and repeated each and every time at the political report in the Party Congress. So again, here, they continue to say we do like political reform, we do want democracy, but we don't want the Western style political system model. So this is what's been specifically mentioned in that political report. I think starting from the 15th Party Congress, 基层民主, grassroots democracy, which the Carter Center has been involved, village elections has been mentioned. The four democracies, democratic election, democratic decision-making, democratic management, democratic supervision, are being repeated each and every time. But I like the term pursuit of happiness, which also in the U.S. Declaration, 创造自己的幸福生活. I mean, that's what democracy is all about, right? So people are allowed to pursue, but according to law, and not suppressed for dissent or for disagreeing with the government. So now, again, moving another 5 years to the 16th Party Congress, Jiang once again repeated, yes, we're going to have our democracy, but it's going to be different from what is known as the Western democracy. And again, 7 points. I guess 7 has always been a favorite number that the leaders like to use. So another 7 area where Jiang is talked about, how we're going to do that. But again, if you look at these 7, none of that is actually actionable. Exactly what you're going to do. when you say we're going to strengthen the socialist rule of law work, what does that mean? What are you going to do? Because it's so vague and so ambiguous. Right? There's nothing actually you can do. And then in 2007, Hu Jintao at a speech at the Central Party School talk about, so this is, I think, for the first time, maybe the so-called three pillars is being introduced. The pillar one is the leadership of the party. Pillar two is people themselves are masters of their own affairs. And pillar three is rule of law. So every time you talk about political reform or democracy, these three pillars are going to be mentioned. But the thing is, these three pillars actually are not mutually supporting each other. They're mutually excluding each other. Because when you insist on the supremacy of the leadership of the party, then how people are going to be masters of their own affairs, and through what process they're going to exercise that right. So that's before the 17th Party Congress. So again, in the 17th Party Congress, number 7, magic number being reduced to 6. And once again, grassroots democracy is being touted as what is happening in China. I think when village elections started in late 20th century and early 21st century, among the Chinese scholars, there is the euphoria that these elections are so-called third rural reform in China. These elections are the silent revolution that will eventually alter China's political landscape. In fact, there's the political science as a field of study flourished as a result of village elections, because for the first time, Chinese political scientists are allowed to go to the countryside to study societal relationship, political decision making. I think a lot of Americans, Arthur mentioned tenure, probably got their tenure by looking at grassroots democracy in China, because they were able to go down and to research. Again, this is 2009. Hu Jintao at the CPPCC 6 years anniversary speech talked about, this is that paradoxical parallel. One is we want to borrow all the fruitful achievements of political civilization of the mankind. On the other hand, we're going to strictly reject Western political system models. Before the 18th Party Congress, there was another speech by Hu Jintao at the Central Party School. So what I call that three furthers. So basically, is more extensive and more substantial people's democracy, and how to make rule of law more central to the state and social governance of China. Again, they all sound very encouraging and very, very exciting, but the challenge is, what are you going to do? When you put this out, it has to be followed by a plan. And that's Hu Jintao's last speech as the leader of China for 10 years. So this is the political work report at the 18th Party Congress. So again, the number jumped to the magic 7. Last time it was 6. So you look at this, there is really not much different, other than number 6 is how do you balance and check the abuse of power. So this concept was being introduced, but at the same time, united front work was introduced. So it's kind of interesting whenever they talk about political reform and democracy, there's social stability, now there is united front work. So moving on to another leader, Wen Jiabao. This is when he was meeting with Thornton, who worked at Goldman Sachs, and then later was the chairman of the Brookings. I think Thornton came back from China and suddenly became fellow travelers. And he liked that so much. And he wrote an article for Foreign Affairs But you look at this, I think this is not a lofty goal of political reform. However, it does have very specific actionable activities. So number one is elections. So elections will be elevated from village level to township level, and then eventually to the county level. Now, if China's elections, competitive elections, are elevated to county level, that's going to change the entire dynamics of elections in China. Still today, it remains at the village level. You know, there are direct elections of People's Congress deputies up to the county level, but those elections are different from village elections. The second he talked about is judicial independence, to give the court, more leverage in deciding cases. And the last thing he talked about is online and print media supervision, which is very good. So each and every time at the annual press conference of the People's Congress, Wen Jiabao would talk about this. But he never really talked about this to the Chinese people. Each and every time he talked about political reform, and even these specific plans, his guest is always a foreigner. He never really addressed these issues to the Chinese people themselves. I think my time is running out, so I'll flip. So again, here he has the approach, two-pronged approach identified. I can talk about this when questions are raised during the discussion time. So lastly, Xi Jinping himself, before he became Secretary General of the, he mentioned 5 characters in Chinese. And in 2010 and 2011, all the way up to 2012, there was such excitement in China about so-called 习武字. So there are 5 characters, but that has just turned the whole political reform community, into a frenzy mode of, what exactly does he mean? And that 武字 is 权为民所赋. So the political power are bestowed to the officials by the people. Now this is different from Hu Jintao likes to say 勤为民所技, 权为民所用, 利为民所谋. In other words, these are all moral obligations of the party and the state officials, right? So, sort of the interests of the people, use your power for the people. But when you're talking about power being bestowed to the officials, we're talking about the process. And that's procedural democracy. That's why the 5 characters of Xi were so exciting. The unfortunate development is after he became the leader, these 5 words seem to have disappeared from the political discourse. All right. Again, did he ever talk about political reform? I searched high and low. I didn't see any public statement on political reform, according to Xi Jinping. There was rumor saying after the military reform, there will be meaningful political reform. And there are 4 areas. Number 1 is prohibiting government officials from becoming People's Congress deputies. If you look at the Liaoning scandal, most of those deputies are either government officials or business people. The second is separate the state and the party. Zhao Ziang mentioned this way back in 1987. Public financial disclosure. This is a very important part of anti-corruption efforts. And lastly, judicial independence. If this is what he has in mind, there is serious stuff, if seriously and meaningfully introduced. So I will conclude my presentation basically by saying we don't know how far we have crossed the river of political reform. I don't know how many stones they have touched and how far they're going to go. And I'll just go to my last slide, which is, this is Yawei, who used to teach at Fudan University. Now he's at the Shanghai Party School. I'm totally struck by his prediction. He said political reform won't happen at the bottom. It won't take place even in the middle. It has to be started at the top. I guess this is what was being discussed early. you have to have someone like Jiang Jingguo that will make that action. If it starts at the bottom, then that's different. That's what Wei Jingsheng talked about today. So that we don't have the top design. And secondly, he said, if you're serious, you come up with a plan, and then maybe just like the economic reform, set up a special political zone. Maybe turn Shenzhen into a special zone where you can conduct all your experiments. And also you can decide, if you can answer Wei Jingsheng's question, 90% of the Chinese people are in support of democracy. I'm quite surprised by that claim. I don't know where that finding actually has come from. But in any case, so I think if Xi Jinping is serious about political reform, he has the authority and he has the political capital to do it. But even if he doesn't, I think political reform actually will be the best tool to save China or to preserve the legitimacy of the party. Thank you very much.